Good morning, Year 11, and welcome today to your screencast for Health and the People topic, your medicine topic. And today we're going to look at the modern period. So you can see that the modern period starts in around 1900 and goes all the way to 2025, so present day. I would just say a disclaimer on that is don't talk about, obviously COVID or something like that in your exams. Kind of stop where we look at the alternative medicine element, please. So we're going to start just a year before 1900, just to give some context of what's happening at the time, some historical background. In 1899, we've got the Charles Booth Report and the Boer War, both showing how unfit people in Britain were. And we also have the then Rowntree Report, which basically really links to the fact that, again, people are unhealthy in Britain. So 28% of people in York were living below the poverty line. And as a result of this, the Labour Party was created. The Labour Party promised to work for working people, make things better for working people, make things healthier. At the same time as this was going on, we have aseptic surgery created, which I mentioned in the last screencast. The idea that everything should be sterilised in surgery, not just the wound. So it's an adaptation of Lister's antiseptics. So if we go down then, the creation of the Labour Party and the fact that British people were so unfit and the fact that they couldn't be used in the army, which was really negative for the empire, led to the Liberal Party, who were in charge, having to act. And the Liberal Party introduced something called the Liberal Reforms. So there's three that you can remember. There's the 1906 Free School Meals Act, there's the 1907 Free School Medical Checks, and there's the 1911 National Insurance Act, which they're all liberal reforms, all things that should help Britain get healthier so people don't vote for the Labour Party. But in between those liberal reforms, we've got Elric, who was Koch's assistant, and he comes up with the magic bullet. So the first cure that we look at in medicine is effective cure, we should say. The first cure is the magic bullet by Elric in 1909. He's able to find something that kills germs, which is really positive. Moving forwards then to the First World War, we've got two examples during the First World War, and we start off with Fleming, who experiences Staphylococcus for the first time, but Staphylococcus is this kind of undefeatable germ. He's not able to find a magic bullet for it. And then we've also got Marie Curie, who creates the mobile X-ray, which helps those soldiers who are potentially internally bleeding to be able to operate to know where the injuries are, to not move them in case it makes the internal bleeding worse. Also allows doctors to know where to cut into the skin instead of making a bit of a mess of things. So this is quite positive, and we can see how war advances medicine. I would then go to the tuberculosis vaccine. So Koch's method was finally used to create the tuberculosis vaccine. So used Koch's method. We can see that there as well. And then in 1928, we kind of go back to this idea of Staphylococcus. Fleming hadn't been able to defeat it, but then by accident he found out about the penicillin mold, but he didn't take that forward and try and create it into a cure. He just wrote a journal about it because he thought it was a antiseptic, and they already had antiseptics. And so we fast forward and the Second World War begins, and again, as we see with the First World War, we see massive medical advancements. And in 1941, Florian Chain basically read Fleming's research and they test it out, and they found out that penicillin mold is a cure. And they take it to the US government, and the US government start to think about what to do with that. But before we look at what the US government did, we also need to look at the fact that in Britain, the British government is still wrestling with this idea of public health, despite there being a Second World War going on. And the Beveridge Report is kind of put forward, and it says, the government has to defeat the five giants, and it has to care for people cradle to grave. Nothing is done immediately. They're in the middle of a Second World War. Churchill has a very laissez-faire policy to these sorts of things. He's very focused on the Second World War. But it's all about the fact that the government should do this. So the government should implement it. Then we go to 1944, so a couple of years later, and we go back to this idea of penicillin. We can see that Florey & Chain have gone to the US government, and by 1944 the US government have paid a company called Pfizer to mass produce penicillin, which is the first antibiotic which kills Staphylococcus, but it also kills, other germs as well that we know of today, and has a huge impact in the Second World War. So we also have at the same time again medicine impacting not only public health and disease, and disease. It also impacts surgery as well, with a man called Harkin, an American in the UK, doing heart surgery with his bare hands, trying to take out the bullets and fragments and things like that. Then the Second World War ends, and Attlee, who is the Labour Prime Minister, becomes the Labour Prime Minister because he promises to implement the Beveridge Report. He promises that the Five Giants will end. He promises to care for people cradle to grave. He defeats Churchill, and that leads to the NHS being created, and that is an example of the welfare state. And the welfare state is really simply, I'm going to just highlight this. So the welfare state is just really, really simply the fact that people are going to be cared to cradle for grave. Another example of the welfare state outside the NHS is the building of council houses as well. So knocking down those slums, those back-to-back houses with loads of people in it, and creating proper nice council houses for people. Again, stopping that spread of disease really. We then move on to 1953, which is where Crick and Watson discovered DNA, and that makes them able to find that disease can be hereditary, so passed down from generation to generation. In 1956 we have mitomycin, so it's an antibiotic to help with cancer treatment. So again, the creation of penicillin has helped create lots more drugs to help, and antibiotics, developing medicine further. We've got surgery still getting better with the first British pacemaker introduced. But a negative for disease then is we have antibiotic resistance beginning to come into play. The fact that antibiotics seemingly didn't start to work or stopped working very well. We also had the first heart transplant in 1968, and if we fast forward a little bit to 2015, 2016, and we think about public health, the Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, said that the NHS was costing £116 billion a year. So again, suggesting the cost of it was extraordinary. We've got the sugar tax in 2018 to help people become healthier. An example really there of positive health, trying to promote a healthy lifestyle. And finally, we've got alternative medicine that is still quite popular today, especially around surgery or dealing with the after effects of surgery. So we've got acupuncture, which is needles in the skin to help begin healing, and we've got aromatherapy, that kind of idea of smell to help you heal. So what I've given you there is a really quick overview, and if we have a look at the themes, we can definitely see massive improvements as we go. Now, antibiotics is definitely important in terms of disease, and we can see that kind of really brings everything together. We have the first cure, and then we have multiple cures following on from that. We have nice, I would say, steady improvements in terms of surgery, but nothing I would say is as significant as the industrial period, which went from completely ineffective surgery to effective surgery. But I think as well the biggest change for me in this period would be the element of public health. And the element of public health that really changes the most is we can see this change from a laissez-faire policy to the government getting involved, at first with the Liberal Party, and then really creating a welfare state with the British government after the Second World War. So what I've given you there is a massive overview of the modern period. Again, like with the other screencasts, I have not gone into depth with these events. That is for you to do independently with your flashcards. So again, there's the overview, but you need to know about these events and you can use your flashcards to do that.